Thank you for tuning into the Monocle Dynasty Podcast, where we keep an eye on Dynasty football. Your hosts dive deep on players, rankings, strategies, and much more. Make sure to follow us on Twitter at Monocle Dynasty. And now, here's your host. Welcome back to the Monocle, where we keep an eye on Dynasty football. I'm your host, Dynasty Coach A, and tonight I'm going to be comparing this year's rookie draft class to previous years, and I'll try to show you what tiers of picks you should be trying to acquire. But first, I want to talk a little bit of free agency. I don't want to dive too much into it. I don't want to get too much into the details, but if you're looking for that kind of detailed conversation or anything about all of these moves, because it's been a wild offseason, I'd recommend you listen to Terrestrial Takes, Tale of Two Rivals, Fantasy Players Club, or the JWB podcast. They all do a great job of explaining what the hell's going on right now, and like I said, check them out. They've been explaining and keeping up with everything. There's so much going around. I mean, maybe it's my fault for listening to too many podcasts, but I just feel like there's so much talking about it that I'll just let everyone else do that part, and I'll stick to everything else. But what I do want to say about free agency is don't overreact. You know, if a player like Davante Adams, Davante Adams going from Aaron Rodgers to Derek Carr is obviously a downgrade, but Davante Adams is still a really good player. So don't lose your mind about Davante Adams. Don't think he's going to, completely drop down to a wide receiver 24 or something like that just because now he's with Derek Carr. Yes, it's a downgrade, but it might be a downgrade from wide receiver 2-3 to a wide receiver 8. You're still going to be plenty happy having someone like that on your squad, and that applies to a lot of other players as well. Obviously, the Tyreek Hill trade happened today, and it's a very similar situation. It's a downgrade from Patrick Mahomes to Tua, believe it or not. But I'm not going to freak out about Tyreek. I still think he's going to get his. He's shown that he's a very good player, and I'm going to knock him down a notch, but I'm not going to freak out about it. And once again, there's a million other instances of that this offseason. So just try not to overreact. Reaction is good, but overreaction is definitely not. So that's really all I have to say about free agency. If you want more details, go check out those pods. But what I wanted to talk to you guys about tonight was basically rookies. A lot of people have said this is a bad rookie class. I've talked about that on other pods. I don't think that. I don't think it's a bad rookie class. I think, that it compares, decently to other rookie classes that we've had recently. And I think it's more about just like missing the landmines than anything else. So that's going to be our goal, is missing those. But for tonight's purposes, I didn't really want to get into the players themselves, because I feel like everyone's telling you right now, go buy this, or not go buy. This is the wide receiver 1 for rookies. This is the running back 1 for rookies. This is the running back 2 for rookies, so on and so forth. I don't want to talk about or get into that necessarily. I just want to talk about the actual draft class as a whole, because I basically want to show where you should be in rookie drafts, like where you should try to be in rookie drafts, and also like what picks you should try to get, and how comfortable you should feel with those picks. Like that's basically my goal for tonight. So what I did was I looked at the last 4 draft classes, including this one. So I guess the last 3 draft classes and then this one. Basically just looking at how many tier 1 through 4 players they had. And then, which it might not sound like it, but tier 1 through 4 are still like very draftable players. Like they're pretty good. Obviously tier 1 is very good, and so on and so forth. But players that you would want to draft and players that you could probably be pretty excited about. Now, they're not all hits. It's impossible. there's too many variables for them to all be hits. Sometimes it can be a coaching thing. Look at Urban Meyer from last year. Sometimes it could be a fit. The player just doesn't fit with the team very well. And there's a million other reasons why a player might not hit. So they're not all going to be hits. But you'll see that a lot of them are. Maybe even most of them are, I would assume. All I did was take the top 4 tiers from my rookie model from the past 4 years or 3 years, like I said. So I didn't change anything. I didn't do anything to make these players look better or worse or anything like that. It's literally what it says in the model. And then going into this year, obviously it's projected draft capital for these players, so things can change and things probably will change. But I guess the hope would be that for every player that maybe drops a notch or anything like that, that maybe you would have a guy that drafts somebody ahead of them. Because one thing we do know about this draft class is that everyone loves a different player. You have some people saying Drake London is the wide receiver 1. Some people Treylon Burks. Some people Garrett Wilson. Some people Chris Olave. Just everyone has a different 1. Everyone has a different 5. Everyone has a different 12. So I guess the hope would be by skipping over the bad players that we would still be able to get some of those players, even if a couple of these get worse draft capital or whatever it is. Now the combine's already happened. A lot of pro days have already happened. So I have all of that data in the model. That part is done. So that's just another notch in the model that we don't have to worry about. I'm not projecting 40 times. I'm not projecting burst score. I'm not projecting anything like that. So that part's already done. All we're waiting for at this point is draft capital. But if I do the show after we have draft capital, then it's kind of pointless, because the whole point of the show is to tell you, or is to get you to try to trade for some of these picks. Whether it's trading up or trading back, either way. And, if we wait a month, that's just not going to work out very well. So let's go ahead and dive in, and we will start with the 2019 class. And 2019, we see 17 players that were considered tier 1 through tier 4. And we start with A+, which, it's boring as hell. A+A, B+B, but, that whatever. I guess I'm boring. We have 3 A+ players, and they're in no particular order. I literally just grouped them, whether they were A+, A, B+, or B. So don't take this as like the order I would have drafted them or anything else, especially with the tight ends, because we know nobody's drafting a tight end in the top 3, unless it's Kyle Pitts. And even then, I still wasn't drafting him there. So just because we see TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant are considered A+ players here, but I'm not drafting them in the top 3. It just so happens that they're, the tier 1 of tight ends. So we have 3 tier 1 players. It's AJ Brown, TJ Hawkinson, and Noah Fant. That's it for the 2019 class. The 2019 class, if you want to talk about a down class, that was it. Now, some good players came out of it. We have Kyler Murray in the next tier, tier 2. And then, you still have DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Josh Jacobs, Darrell Henderson, Miles Sanders, Devin Singletary, Damian Harris later on. There's good players in the 2019 class, but of all, you'll see as we go through it, of all the draft classes, this one is technically the worst. It has the least amount of tier 1 through 4 players, and it's not even overly exciting as far as the tier 1, tier 2 players, the top guys. So then, like I said, we have Kyler Murray in tier 2. He's all by himself. He's the only tier 2 player. Dwayne Haskins, N'Keal Harry, and Marquise Brown are in tier 3. One thing I will say, even though people are sitting there going, "Oh, N'Keal Harry's a bust," and he absolutely is. He hit a lot of things that made people excited about him, and he got drafted in the first round, to a good team. So, I'm not saying that it's a miss or anything like that. Like I said, there's going to be misses, but the point would be that he was never going to be the 101. He was never going to be projected as the 101, at least by my model. So somebody was likely going to take him, and that's kind of what I was talking about before, where we're trying to not have these, not draft the misses, not draft the busts. Even though they might still be there, they might still show up, but we're not going to draft them early enough, or somebody else is probably going to take them. So Haskins, Harry, and Marquise Brown. Then we get into the tier 4 players: DK Metcalf, Deebo Samuel, Drew Lock, Daniel Jones, Josh Jacobs, Darrell Henderson, Miles Sanders, Bryce Love, Devin Singletary, and Damian Harris. Like I said, there's some good players in that mix, even though they're tier 4. And they all kind of had reasons why they were in that tier 4. DK Metcalf couldn't stay healthy. He couldn't really stay on the field. He didn't quite get the draft capital that everyone maybe was hoping he was going to get. Excuse me. Deebo, was a senior. He went to the Senior Bowl and he blew up. He had a lot of exciting things that were going on, but he wasn't this overall complete profile. But as far as the QBs, the tier 4 QBs are probably guys I'm not going to like, but especially with Drew Lock and Daniel Jones, they were drafted early enough, especially Daniel Jones, that you're still going to draft them. You're still going to put them on your teams. I just don't want to draft them too early and be, heavily invested in them. And then obviously we get into the running backs, and there's some players that have won you some games, and so there's some excitement there. But like I said, it's the worst of all the classes. So we see 3 tier 1 players, 1 tier 2 player, 3 tier 3 players, and 10 tier 4 players. So that's 2019, a total of 17 tier 1 through 4 players. Now we get in 2020, which is a very exciting class, which you already know because it's 2022. But we have Jonathan Taylor, which I technically put in a tier of his own. He's above tier 1, but for this purpose, we'll go ahead and say he's tier 1. But I colored him a little different just to show he just breaks into a different tier. I don't know what to make of that. Obviously, we know he's very, very good. But, he's in a tier of his own, at least for this draft class. Justin Jefferson is tier 1, DeAndre Swift, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, and Joe Burrow. Now, you might say, oh, CEH is garbage, blah, 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 whatever. The dude got, first-round draft capital. And the model has nothing. The model does not care that he got drafted to Kansas City. All that matters is that he got first-round draft capital. He did very well in college. He had a full workhorse back profile. The only thing you could say is he's 5'8", but I mean, even then, he has a good BMI. Everything about CEH said that he was good. Now, you'll also notice that he's not, he's not 101, he's not 102, that kind of thing. So he's good. He's in that top tier, but based on the model, you wouldn't have been drafting him 101 or even 102. There's 2 running backs ahead of him. There's 2 running backs ahead of him, and there's a wide receiver ahead of him that you would have been taking before CEH. Joe Burrow, once again, these are not necessarily in order as far as the different, or the actual positions are in order, but as far as like comparing the running backs to the quarterbacks, I'm not saying I would take these players over Joe Burrow. He would have easily been the 102 beyond or behind Jonathan Taylor. But once again, we have 5 with Jonathan Taylor. We have 5 A+ or tier 1 players. Getting into tier 2, we have J.K. Dobbins, A.J. Dillon, Antonio Gibson, CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, and Tua Tagovailoa. I always say it right, and just now I didn't for whatever reason. So Tua Tagovailoa. We have all those players, and they're all pretty good. I mean, I guess the jury's still out on Jerry Jeudy, but I'd say every single one of the rest of those players, besides J.K. Dobbins, who got hurt, has stood out. But even Dobbins stood out before he got injured. So all great players in the tier 2. Moving into tier 3, we see a couple of names that you probably don't love, and KJ Hamler, Jalen Reagor, maybe Adam Troutman. That's once again, we're not freaking out about the tight ends. So, but we have T. Higgins, Brandon Ayuk, Cam Akers, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, and you might be saying to yourself, how the hell is Justin Herbert in tier 3? the dude was a senior. He was coming from the Pac-12. Not saying that obviously he's in that tier 3. Like, he still shows out, but you can even think back to your 2020 drafts. Like, no one was freaking out about Justin Herbert there until he actually stepped on the field. There was less excitement than there is now. Let's just put it that way. And then we get into tier 4 players, and we have Keyshawn Vaughn, Bryson Hopkins, Harrison Bryant, and Alberto Okwuegbunam. So, the tight ends are tight ends, but Keyshawn Vaughn, a tier 4 player, you're not drafting him in the first round if you're following the model. Let's just put it that way. So, all in all, we see 5 tier 1 players, 6 tier 2 players, 8 tier 3, and 4 tier 4 for a grand total of 23 tier 1 through 4 players in 2020. Excellent draft. We all know that. There's a lot of good players there. Let's move on to 2021. So in 21, we see 2 more tier 0 players, I guess you want to call it. Jamar Chase and Kyle Pitts. They're just like Jonathan Taylor. They were in a tier of their own. I don't want to say the G word because it's just used too often. I'll just say that they're very, very good. Very good players. Going into tier 1, we have Devontae Smith, Travis Etienne, Najee Harris, Javonte Williams, Justin Fields, and Trevor Lawrence. All amazing prospects, all amazing players. Travis Etienne gets hurt, breaks my heart. Najee Harris blew up. Javonte Williams is considered like a top 2 running back at this point by everyone. Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence are probably the only 2 big question marks, just because they were in rough situations. Trevor Lawrence, we're learning more and more about Urban Meyer every day. We're seeing that, Trevor Lawrence was probably working with a very bad situation. And the same thing with Fields. We know all about Nagy, and he wasn't doing anything to help his quarterback. He wasn't working to his strengths. And so I'm not losing faith on either player. I still love them. Moving into the tier 2, we have Mac Jones, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Rashad Bateman, Elijah Moore, Jalen Waddle, and Pat Freiermuth. All players that showed out at some point. Zach Wilson's probably the one that stands out that really didn't. But, he also was dealing with injuries. He also had wide receivers that were dealing with injuries. And now they're talking about, like, every single service that I see is talking about adding another wide receiver to the Jets. Like, not just any wide receiver, a top 10, a top 20 wide receiver at the very least. So, if you're adding a Drake London or Jameson Williams or whoever to the Jets on top of what they already have, then I'm going to be even more excited about Zach Wilson. Might be somebody that you want to go ahead and get some more of because he's pretty damn cheap. Trey Lance, everyone loves Trey Lance right now. It's kind of funny because dude did nothing, and people are just overly excited about him. But he is here in that tier 2, and so it's rightfully so. Maybe not as excited as some people are getting, but he's exciting. Elijah Moore blew up, dealt with some injuries. I love me some Elijah Moore. Wish he could have stayed healthy, and we could have seen exactly what he could have been. Jalen Waddle was amazing, broke some rookie records. And then Pat Freiermuth was held his own. He wasn't Kyle Pitts. Everyone was all about Kyle Pitts, but Pat Freiermuth was pretty damn good, and not the greatest offense, at least efficiency-wise. So, it's another player that we should be excited about. Getting into the tier 3 players, we have Rondale Moore and Tutu Atwell. Okay, we got a couple misses there, but that's why they're tier 3 and not tier 1 and 2. And then we have De'Ami Brown, Trey Sermon, and Kyle Trask in the tier 4. Once again, no one that you should be overly excited about here, but players that I want on my team. Like, if I can get them extremely cheap, and that goes with the tier 3 players obviously as well. Rondale Moore, Tutu Atwell. If I can get them extremely cheap, I want them, or free. If they're just sitting on waivers, or you can get them for a third. I'm not paying seconds for any of these players. It's just not worth it. But including Rondale, get the hell out of here, spaceman. But I just if I can get any of these players for a third, or especially like getting into Diami, Trey Sermon, Kyle Trask, if I can get any of them for like a late third, then I'm definitely trying that because I don't know, especially with Diami Brown, like their quarterback situation was absolutely terrible. Now Trey Sermon could just be garbage, but we also know Kyle Shanahan, he's so mysterious, like my good pal Duchesne's would say. So what if he just decides that he really likes Trey Sermon this year? I'm not saying it's likely, but it's worth a third round pick. And that brings us to 2022. Now, the focus of this exercise was not to sit here and tell you this is the player I like the most, this is the second player, third, fourth, fifth, so on and so forth. It was more to show you tiers of what we should be focusing on. I think by looking at the past 3 years, we've seen the different tiers. They hit very differently. The ones and twos are hitting pretty damn well. You start getting into those threes and fours in tier 3, tier 4, it's not nearly as exciting. Although there are some players that still hit. It's definitely not a. It's definitely not like once you get into tier 3, tier 4, there's nothing. Or I wouldn't have included them if that was the case. And there's always a different reason why they might be in a tier. Some players are because they didn't play enough. Whether it was injury, whether it was, Jameson Williams. I'll just bring him up. He's in tier 1. So this isn't even really a good example. I don't know why I'm talking about him, but he only played technically 1 year. I mean, he had 2 other years of production, but it was very minimal production at Ohio State. He goes to Alabama and just completely blows up. Now his model prospect score is not going to be as high as somebody who played for 3 years and got on the field and was a true stud. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Jameson Williams isn't good. It just means that he doesn't have the complete prospect score that we would like to see, or the story that we would like to see. So there's always a reason why one score might be above another, one player might be above another. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad just because they're in tier 4, but it just means that they're less likely to hit. And I think that's what I've kind of figured out over the years, or I guess technically over the years at this point, of staring at this model and just trying to figure out what can I glean from it. It's less about how amazing they're going to be and more about how likely they are to hit. And so, even if it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the best player that you've ever seen in the history of the NFL, if they're likely to hit, they're probably likely to get a value boost as well. So what we see in 2022 is we have 4 tier 1 players. One's a running back, 2 wide receivers, and 1 tight end. Once again, we're not going to freak out about the tight end, but there is a tier 1 tight end here. Then we have 8 tier 2 players, and that is 1 running back, 2 QBs, 4 wide receivers, and a tight end. And we have 4 tier 3 players. That's a QB, 2 wide receivers, and a tight end. And then we have 4 tier 4 players, and that is a QB, or 2 QBs and 2 running backs, which leaves us with 20 players total that are in tier 1 and tier 4. So going back to 2021, because I think I skipped over it, but we ended up having 20 in tier 1 through tier 4 as well. Now, there was much more A-plus players or tier 1 and tier 2 players, but we see a lot of A players or tier 2 players here. So in 2022, so there's still a lot. It's mixed up differently, but we still have 12 top 2 tier players, which is tough to say, but we still have that in this 2022 class. So all the people saying it's the worst class they've ever seen and yada yada, it just doesn't make any sense to me because there's good players in this class. And like I said, this is all based on projected draft capital, so some of it's going to change a little bit. I think the projected draft capital is pretty good. Even if it changes a little bit, like draft capital doesn't change that much in my model. So, except for the running backs. The running backs, it's pretty important. So I don't think it's going to be enough to like drastically change this. And hopefully, people are talking about Christian Watson going to the Chiefs now that Tyreek Hill went to the Dolphins. And, that would skyrocket him into the first round. And, if you've listened to my podcast, you know that I'm not the biggest Christian Watson fan. So we would hope that players like that would get drafted above these guys and we'd still be excited about it. All that brings me to the tiers of the picks that I'm looking for. And if I'm trying to trade into picks right now, and not that this is that different than any class or anything like that, but I just kind of wanted to give you an idea. What I'm looking to first and foremost is 101 through 103. I want any of those the top running back or the two top wide receivers. Now you'll notice I only talk about Superflex leagues. You'll notice I did not talk about a QB. I don't have a QB in that top tier, so I'm not going to be drafting them there. I'll move players within the tiers. I'm not moving them out of tiers just because. I don't care if everyone else wants to draft Malik Willis at 101, 102, 103, whatever. That's fine. Let them do it. I'm not going to do that unless I'm in a league where I really feel like this league's extremely active and I can just sell this player for whatever the hell I want. Then that's completely different. But obviously every league is different, and I don't want to give you advice and tell you to go draft a player that you're not going to be able to trade and then you're not going to be able to play. So I would want the 101 through the 103, but not for a quarterback. Then from 104 to 104 to 112, I feel about the same. Now, obviously there's players that I like more in that tier that I would be more excited about. I feel like there's kind of a tier break at 109, but technically you have another 8 players here at 8 players. Yeah. And so any of those picks from 104 to 112, I would be perfectly fine having. And, that might mean that if you're sitting at a 106 or something like that, maybe you trade back to 109 and get something on top of it, get an early second or whatever it might be. And that would be the goal. Obviously, you're not just going to trade back just to trade back. You're going to do it because you're gaining other assets, future picks, whatever it might be. But I'm perfectly fine being in that mix because I feel like there's enough good players there to where, you're not going to miss out just because you traded back to the 112. And that might be controversial because a lot of people, I've heard a lot of podcasts talking about, I'd trade for a 23 first, at the 104 or whatever, they're saying. Obviously, every podcast is different. And I'm not saying that at no point would I trade for a 23 first because the 23 class is going to be great. But it all depends on your team. If you're competing, then you're going to want to either trade these picks for a current player that's, getting you something like a Leonard Fournette who just got a 3-year contract, or, Allen Robinson, or all these players that, in free agency have gained value. Maybe you want to go trade for one of them. But if you are, I don't want to say stuck, but if you are, if you're still on the clock and no one's willing to trade, and you're gonna draft a player here, I'm still perfectly fine being up until 112. 112, and even getting into the tier 3, 201 through 204. I'm still perfectly fine being there. In fact, I think there's going to be some very exciting players because I do think some players are going to drop because players like Malik Willis, Christian Watson, so on and so forth are going to go ahead of some of these players. And then getting into tier 4, it's 205 to 208. After 208, going into 209 plus, not nearly as exciting, but there's still going to be players that are gonna hit, especially some of these running backs. There's a lot of running backs in that tier 5 that are scored similarly to Elijah Mitchell. And, we're not going to get a James Robinson or Elijah Mitchell every year. It's not going to always happen. But you want to have some of those guys on your team, especially in the 3rd, 4th, 5th rounds of some of these rookie drafts. So I guess I don't know, for whatever reason, I'm taking it upon myself to like give people hope about this draft class. But I hear so much hate towards, or hatred towards the draft class, that I kind of just feel like I need to, kind of give it some love and show people that it's not all doom and gloom. As far as the actual players themselves, like I said, I didn't want that to be the focus of this, but also I have patrons that pay for my rankings, and I kind of feel like if I'm just giving them away for free, then what the hell are they paying for? I give them a lot. The trade calculator and all of the rankings and the start set tool in season, stuff like that. But I also feel like I should just kind of hold that information back a little bit. I'm perfectly fine, talking about these players and giving out a little info, but I don't want to sit here and say, this is who I'm taking 101, 102, 103, so on and so forth. So hopefully this gave you a little bit of info about this draft class. Maybe makes you feel a little bit better. Hopefully this can help you go make a couple trades. Like, once again, whether it's trading up, trading back, or trading out, whatever it is, even I know it seems blasphemous, but so many people are talking about trading for your 23 first, or trading for a 23 first. What if you trade a 23 first for a 22 first plus? You always have to kind of think against the grain, or outside of the box, because when everyone's telling you to do one thing, then it doesn't necessarily make sense for the market anymore. So like I said, I hope this really helps everyone out. Please let me know if you're, if you have any questions about it, if you're have a question about trade or anything else. I'm obviously willing to help. Please check out the Patreon, and obviously the full rankings are there. It's patreon.com/DynastyCoachA. I will be back next week with another pod, but for now, I'm cashing out.